Imagine waking up and finding your business bank account completely emptied.
Oh, that is literally a nightmare scenario.
Right. And it wasn't emptied by a malicious hacker and not by some rogue employee either.
Which is what you'd usually expect.
Exactly. But in this case, it was emptied by an automated vendor payment system, just because it thought it had the legal authority to seize those assets.
And all because of like a tiny error?
Yeah, microscopic error in how it identified an invoice.
Hmm.
So you try to sue the vendor, but when your lawyers demand the server logs, the data is just a complete mess.
A total nightmare of conflicting timestamps and blurry user permissions.
Right. And so a judge looks at it, throws out the case, and your money is just legally gone forever.
Which is terrifying. But that is the reality of digital fragility.
It really is. You know, you trust the digital foundation of your life, but you rarely think about what happens if it actually shifts.
Because it's entirely out of sight for most of us. We like to admire the sleek user interfaces of our banking apps or government portals.
Sure, they look great.
But the structural reality holding all of it together is happening deep in the architecture, way below the surface.
And that is exactly the invisible scaffolding we are getting into today on this deep dive. So welcome in.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we are looking at what keeps massive systems, multinational corporations, automated AI agents, entire governments from just completely collapsing under the weight of their own complexity.
It's a huge topic.
It is. And we have a stack of highly technical structural architecture notes here covering a concept known as NWAF.
Which stands for the Network-Wide Authority Framework.
Exactly. And the mission for our deep dive today is to really understand how this framework utilizes something called identity invariance to fundamentally change how organizations and governments operate.
It's a profound shift, honestly, in how we think about trust. For decades, we've been, moving from just hoping systems work together to trying to legislate that they do.
Lots of compliance meetings.
Right, lots of compliance. But now, finally, we're structurally guaranteeing that they work together at a mathematical level.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the architecture of the network-wide authority framework and how it fixes our infrastructure, we first have to understand exactly why and how these massive systems break down in the first place.
You have to know the disease before you look at the cure.
Right. So what actually happens when governance fails?
Well, to understand the failure, we need to look at a highly specific metric from the research known as the 4.9% problem.
The 4.9% problem, I mean, that sounds like a very specific margin of error.
It is, and it's a critical threshold. The 4.9% problem refers to the finding that systemic collapse doesn't actually require, a massive 50 or 60% failure rate in a system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when a mere 4.9% of decisions break continuity due to something called identity drift, it triggers a catastrophic system-wide collapse.
A collapse of authority and accountability.
Exactly.
Wait, less than 5%? That's wild.
Mhm.
So if I'm building a skyscraper for you and the foundation drifts by just 4.9%,
We aren't just talking about a slanted floor on the top level.
right, the entire structural integrity is compromised, the whole building comes down.
The entire building comes down. And in the realm of organizational governance, that collapse looks like a total inability to prove who did what, when they did it, and whether they were actually allowed to do it.
Complete chaos, basically.
Complete chaos. The research outlines a very specific anatomical breakdown of how this governance dies. It's a chain reaction that starts with that 4.9% identity drift.
Okay, I want to ground this for the listener real quick. When we say identity drift, we aren't talking about someone having an existential crisis, right?
No, definitely not.
So what does that actually look like in a real-world digital system? Is it like when an employee shares a password, or maybe a session cookie gets hijacked?
Those are perfect examples, actually. Identity drift happens when a system loses the precise, undeniable linkage to the entity taking an action.
Got it.
So let's say a director of finance, Sarah, goes on vacation. She forwards a secure dashboard link to her assistant to approve a routine $100 vendor payment while she's out.
Happens all the time.
Right. The system sees the valid token in the link, assumes it's Sarah, and processes it. The identity of the actor has just drifted from Sarah to her assistant.
But the system has no idea that happened.
Exactly.
So the system's foundation has essentially shifted by an inch, which leads directly to the next failure point in the notes, which is authority misalignment. The system thinks the assistant has director-level authority.
You're hitting on the core vulnerability there. If the system isn't 100% certain of the true identity, it absolutely cannot align that identity with the correct permissions.
So the assistant could do major damage.
Yeah, the assistant might accidentally click a button to approve a 5-year, multi-million-dollar auto-renewing contract instead of a single $100 payment.
Oh, man.
And because of the identity drift, the system allows it.
Which means the actual request being made is completely unstable. The request to spend millions of dollars is no longer anchored to a valid source of power.
And that request instability is the third link in the chain of failure. The transaction is just floating in this gray area of unverified power.
Right. And when the structural boundaries of a request disappear, you trigger the fourth failure point, which is duty reinterpretation. Okay, I can see where this is going. Because the request is unanchored, the system or the people running it are basically flying blind, right?
Exactly.
They have to start guessing what the rules are on the fly.
And that is the most dangerous phase. The software rules might get confused because the metadata doesn't match normal behavioral patterns, so the system just defaults to an override state.
Or human employees see a strange approval in the system and just shrug and push it through.
Right, because it has a director's name attached to it. They start making judgment calls outside the bounds of their actual governed roles.
They start making up the rules because the original rule book is blurry. And if everyone is just improvising, the paper trail must become an absolute nightmare.
The paper trail literally shatters. This is the fifth step, evidence fragmentation.
Right, fragmentation.
6 months later, the company realizes they are bleeding millions of dollars to this vendor. The lawyers get involved. They demand the records.
And it's a mess.
Total mess. The emails say one thing, the server logs show a different IP address, and the vendor's API recorded something else entirely.
The evidence of the decision is fragmented across multiple incompatible systems.
Precisely, which leads to step 6.
So if an auditor or a judge or a CEO comes in and says, show me exactly how this decision was made, you literally can't.
Right. The fragmented evidence makes it mathematically impossible to reconstruct the chain of events. You lose reconstructibility.
Which brings us to the end of the chain.
Yeah, when you lose reconstructibility, you hit the final, fatal domino, which is the collapse of admissibility.
Meaning you can't even sue the vendor because you have no legally valid proof of who actually authorized the contract in the first place.
Your evidence wouldn't hold up in a court of law. It wouldn't pass a regulatory audit. It's just void.
All of it stemming from that initial 4.9% drift at the identity layer. Just one forwarded link, and suddenly you are in a completely legally indefensible position.
It's wild, but companies operate like this every single day. They just cross their fingers and hope the dominoes don't fall.
But the network-wide authority framework, this NWEF architecture we're discussing, is designed to interrupt this entire catastrophic chain at its very root.